Welcome to this rapid revision video looking at challenges to the religious settlement. Okay, I've called this rapid revision and I will make it as rapid as I can. However, I did think about splitting this one up into 2 or even 3 videos, but ultimately I thought it was important to include them all together. So it'll be a little bit longer than the ones that you're used to, but hopefully not by too much. Enough explanation, let's get straight back into it. The first challenge we'll look at is the Puritan challenge in England. Elizabeth's accession to the throne gave Puritans hope that England would not only become Protestant again, but that it would be the start of more Protestant developments. The religious settlement, with its traditional elements and Catholic-friendly compromises, dashed these hopes. Some Puritan clergy, particularly bishops, ignored the Act of Uniformity and began to introduce more Protestant changes to services, including banning organ music, abolishing certain holy days, which could be unpopular as these are often holidays too, arguing over whether people should stand or kneel during Holy Communion. These challenged Elizabeth's authority because the Act of Supremacy made her the supreme governor of the Church of England. The fact that these things were not in the Bible is what Puritans objected to. So even though Elizabeth was Protestant, the Puritans themselves were a Protestant challenge. Related to this was the crucifix controversy. One Puritan controversy concerned the use of the crucifix, an example of which can be seen on the right. This was an image of Christ dying on the cross, and the cross was the most significant Christian symbol. Elizabeth's settlement allowed images to remain in churches to avoid Catholic anger. These included the image of the crucifix, and Elizabeth ordered every church should in fact have one. This in turn angered Puritans, as the Bible made no reference to this. So what was the outcome? Elizabeth simply had to back down. She didn't have enough Protestant bishops to start dismissing them. Elizabeth no longer insisted on a crucifix in every church, although she did keep one in her own chapel, and many other churches chose to do the same voluntarily. Then we've got the vestment controversy. Elizabeth's royal injunctions stated that priests should continue to wear vestments, which set them apart from the rest of the congregation and as special clothes. Catholics believed that priests had the power to perform the miracle of turning the bread and wine in the Mass into the flesh and blood of Christ. That's the miracle of transubstantiation. So they were, in fact, special. Puritans, though, disagreed. They argued that priests should wear very ordinary or plain clothes, as they were not more powerful than anyone else. So what was the outcome here? Well, most priests did what was commanded, and they wore the vestments. However, in 1566, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Matthew Parker, issued a book of advertisements to tell priests what to wear. An exhibition of vestments was held in London to demonstrate the correct clothing. 110 priests were invited. However, 37 refused to attend. They lost their posts. Where there was a Reformation, there was also a Counter-Reformation. Much as the Protestants challenged the authority of the Pope, Catholics likewise pushed back against Protestantism. In 1566, Pope Pius V issued an order that Catholics should not attend Church of England services. So what was the outcome here? This didn't actually have a massive impact. Those who obeyed the Pope's order were rarely investigated thoroughly. Recusancy fines were affordable for the wealthy, usually being about a shilling, but they were rarely even imposed. Above all, Elizabeth wanted to avoid the creation of Catholic martyrs who might undermine her religious settlement. She was willing to turn a blind eye to these things and not rise to the bait. Elizabeth usually needed to take notice of the nobility, though. These were the most powerful, wealthy and influential members of society. About 1/3 of the nobility and a decent proportion of the gentry were recusants, so they were Catholics who refused to go to the Protestant Church of England services. Most of these remained loyal to Elizabeth, though, but some did not. This was mostly because they found that they had lost the influence that they had enjoyed at court under Mary I, rather than just on purely religious basis. They paid their recusancy fines when asked, and Elizabeth largely left them alone. The most significant opposition, though, came in 1569 with the revolt of the Northern Earls, the Earls of Northumberland and Westmoreland. But they will get their own video and we'll look at the events separately. So what's the outcome here? While the revolt was defeated, Elizabeth was in fact shaken by it. She ordered hundreds of rebels to be executed. So this actually represents a change in Elizabeth's approach to her openly Catholic subjects. She was prepared to turn a blind eye when they left her alone, but as soon as they began to get rebellious, she took a much firmer line. What about the situation in Europe? As we can see on this map, England was literally part of an island off the coast of Europe. But that doesn't mean it couldn't become intertwined with the religious conflicts that were happening there. I've used a piece of cartography software to produce this map. Well, Microsoft Paint, but you get the idea. So therefore you should look at these borders as being basically approximate rather than being actual borders, but they'll help give you the idea of how Europe was divided up at this time. Let's look at the different sections. Firstly, in the sort of mustard colour, we have the Spanish Habsburg territory. That's an empire. Then in the pink, we have the Holy Roman Empire. And then in the sort of bluish green, we've got the Austrian Habsburg territory. What about France? Religious war began in France in 1562. Elizabeth backed the Protestants, hoping to get Calais back in return. Remember that she had lost that. Backing the Protestants had worked in Scotland in 1560, but it failed in France. The Protestants made peace with the Catholics later in 1562. The 1564 Treaty of Troyes confirmed Calais remained French. But what about Spain and the Netherlands? You can see the Spanish Habsburg territory is dotted all over Europe, so this is a powerful and widespread empire which has got influence in lots of different nations. At this time, the Netherlands belonged to the Catholic Philip II of Spain, who had been annoyed by Elizabeth's meddling in France. In 1563, he banned imports of England's most important product, cloth. In fact, that represented about 80% of all of the products which were exported from England, so massively significant. Elizabeth feared the French and Spanish Catholics allying against her in a war. This was made worse by the presence of a 10,000-strong Spanish army in the Netherlands dealing with the Protestant rebellion there. Elizabeth had to decide who to back. We're going to zoom in now on events in the Netherlands, with which Elizabeth and England were often intertwined, and Elizabeth often had to make really important decisions regarding her support of the Protestants in this country. There had been growing discontent in the Netherlands about Spanish rule since the 1550s. The Spanish had persecuted Dutch Protestants with the Spanish Inquisition, which tortured and executed hundreds of Protestants. As nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition, things came to a head in 1566 when Dutch Protestants rose up against Spanish rule. By 1568, the Spanish had defeated the rebellion with an army of 10,000 men under the Duke of Alba. As a result, Alba set up a Council of Troubles to rule the Netherlands, but this was called the Council of Blood by Dutch Protestants, which gives you an idea of what they thought of it. Many fled to England as refugees. This presented two problems to Elizabeth. Firstly, Alba's army was within invading distance of England and could probably defeat her armies if it decided to make the Channel crossing. Also, Elizabeth was worried that she was becoming the most prominent Protestant monarch in Europe. This would have made her a target for Catholic nations. Accepting Protestant exiles only reinforced this. So how did Elizabeth respond to the challenges in the Netherlands? Well, the first problem is that some of Elizabeth's Privy Council saw the revolt as part of a Europe-wide struggle against Catholicism, so they wanted to back the Protestant rebels very openly. Elizabeth's response was as follows. Elizabeth knew that England had neither the wealth nor the power to take on Spain, or France for that matter, or worse still, both if they joined together as Catholic powers. She instead chose not to engage directly, but also did not turn the Dutch refugees away. She let them in. The next problem? Some Dutch exiles became so-called sea beggars, pirates raiding Spanish ships in the North Sea. Elizabeth's response? She allowed the sea beggars to shelter in English ports when they needed to. But she did manage to balance that somewhat. Spanish gold ships also sheltered from the sea beggars in English ports. The money they carried was intended to pay the Duke of Alba's army. So Elizabeth seems to have let them shelter as well, and therefore escape capture. Not as simple as that. Elizabeth confiscated the gold that they were carrying. She argued it really belonged to Genoa, who had loaned the gold to the Spanish. This became known as the Genoese loan, a bit of an Elizabethan joke for you there, and it made Philip II furious. Some final points then. Elizabeth suffered a variety of challenges to her religious settlement. Puritans rejected non-Protestant compromises in the settlement. Elizabeth mostly dealt with this by dismissing serious offenders, but she did agree to let them remove crucifixes from the churches. There were also some serious rebellions by the nobility, such as the revolt of the Northern Earls in 1569, which we'll look at separately. However, most nobles remained loyal or quietly paid their fines. Also, Elizabeth backed Protestant rebels in France and the Netherlands. However, she was careful to avoid all-out war with Spain or France, knowing that England would lose. However, the Catholic threat would increase later, and future videos will cover that very theme. You know what, that wasn't quite as long as I feared it would be. I hope I haven't gone too quickly. There's a lot to cover there. Some of the slides I know have got a lot of writing on them. You can always put them full screen, you can take screenshots of them and turn them into sort of instant index cards if you like, and if you're watching it in HD, hopefully they're not too unclear. But that's sometimes the nature of history. There's just a lot of detail to learn. I hope that this video has been useful to you. If it has, please drop the video a like and subscribe to the channel for more. Thanks very much for watching, and goodbye.